And I think that there were some really important questions asking specifically if people have traveled and then what their experience was if they have traveled during the pandemic. So, as it turns out, that we've got about 34% said that they have traveled since the middle of March, which I wasn't really particularly surprised by that number, and therefore 66% that they had not traveled. And so we asked those people specifically who traveled about how the properties are communicating of all the things before their arrival. So we asked about cleaning protocols and mask requirements and check-in procedures and the availability of amenities and government restrictions and the availability of local restaurants and attractions and activities. So in a few cases, the properties seem to be doing a really gosh darn good job of communicating what's what. People were very satisfied with updated cleaning protocols. They knew all about that. Almost 75% said that they had received that information prior to arrival. And local mask requirements were also quite popular. We had over 50% that said that they knew about the updated check-in procedures, but where people, or I should say when properties are kind of falling flat, is talking about what's going on in the area. So people are not knowing about the status of local restaurants, and even fewer know about the status of attractions and activities. And I feel that this is a huge fail on the part of hoteliers. You should be an expert in your area, and certainly to your guests, you should be able to tell them what's what so they know what to expect when they arrive.
So, Melissa, I have a question, since apparently Lauren told me I'm supposed to. When you said 34% have traveled, did you ask, or do you have any insights or information you can provide about why they traveled? What were the reasons behind their travel? No. Okay. All right. Did you have any reasons for the 66 who did not travel about? Was there anything that shaped that?
We did not. I mean, we still have our questions about the fear and all those things.
Yep.
Yeah, we've got all that.
Any big change in those numbers in any meaningful way?
Things are so from this version 7, things have definitely swung back more positive because things were really in the toilet by July.
Yep.
But we're certainly not even close to where we were in June before the outbreak really took off again.
Right. Got it. So, okay, so let's talk about the area, because this is really important. And by the way, I do want to point out, I think it's fantastic that you called out that they're not just doing a good job, but they're doing a gosh darn good job. That should be the new standard for
gosh darn
good. Are we doing a gosh darn good job? So, when you talking about the area, you mentioned restaurants, you mentioned activities. Are there other things that really stuck out in terms of the kinds of information people who are traveling are looking for?
I mean, so like I said, we asked about all the governmental stuff. Honestly, the property amenities was a little lower than I would have thought. Only about half said that they had received information about that. And of all the things, I mean, okay, learning about all the restaurants and all the statuses of your local activities and attractions maybe is more work than you can handle, but to at least communicate what the availability of your own amenities is, I think that is also a fail.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you'd think people would want to know. I would think people would want to know what's the deal with the fitness center, what's the deal with the pool, and I think that's probably varies by jurisdiction or by area about what's going on there. Dean, Stephanie, what other questions do you have from Melissa?
I just shared the link to the most recent survey results in the chat for anybody else that wants to kind of trying to follow along.
I would, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you if you go on.
No, go ahead.
Oh, because digital marketing is where I live and breathe, I would be really curious as to how those people who traveled, how did they book their reservation? In other words, what are the tendencies now? Are we seeing them going through the travel sites? Are we seeing them calling the hotel directly? And if you are calling the hotel directly, are you asking those questions about, hey, is your restaurant open and different things like that? Are they going directly to the hotel website? And what does that mix of business look like?
I don't know that I've seen a shift from our own clients. I don't know if Stuart, you want to chime in on that, but I don't think we've seen a drastic shift.
Yeah, I think it's a question we can ask next survey for sure, which will go out this upcoming Thursday. But yeah, anecdotally, looking at the market mix for our clients, and keep in mind our clients are typically very low reliant on OTAs in general. You know, we've got them. A lot of them are like 10, 12% reliant on OTAs. So the vast majority has come in direct historically. And we haven't seen a major shift in that. So
I can tell you that from our clients' perspective, phone calls have obviously been up, always up. Also, a lot of, not to book necessarily, although it is a part of the discovery and confirmation process to make a choice of booking, but also from a pre-arrival perspective, they're not just relying upon the pre-arrival email to be inclusively complete. They're calling to know any latest updates as to imminent information changes, restaurant availabilities, event availabilities, activity centers, attractions, and things like this as to statuses of it. And with any great survey, it's not about did you ask all the questions, but did you ask enough questions to give us a direction as to where we should be considering what we aren't considering now? And to your point with it, whether we know exactly how they're booking or how they may have changed the modalities of booking, one thing's very, very clear. We must be doing a better job of identifying all the information as an authority in our market for our guests, whether it be those things of restaurants and attractions or just simple security questions that they may have, protocol changes and so forth. The spectrum of questions is there, and the survey points it really clearly. It's like you should know this stuff, and you should be telling your guests this stuff, and you should be sharing it to people that you don't even know are going to be your guests yet.
Yeah. If you think back to a couple of surveys ago, we were asking the question about how do people want to check in, and we were a little surprised. It was very split. We weren't surprised that kiosks were at the very bottom of the list. No one wants to use a kiosk, so people stop trying to put kiosks in your lobbies.
They don't want to touch things, Stuart.
They don't want to touch things other people have touched after standing in line behind someone else. You know, that's just, it doesn't solve any problems. But the number one most popular response was still, and it's skewed by age, but the number one response was at the front desk. And when you peel that back a little bit, I think part of it's that reason. It's people have questions. There's a lot of newness to this. We did see that younger folks, so those dreaded millennials, or as Tim likes to call them, adults under 40, which name he's going to have to change pretty soon.
I got to change that in 2021 to adults, 40 and younger. But
That's
yeah.
right. So there's
really unwieldy the year after that, but we'll do what we can.
The dreaded millennials would prefer a mobile app, which suits our propaganda because we sell a mobile app, which is partly why we asked the question. But it was interesting to see that so many people still want to go to the front desk because they have questions.
So they want to talk to a human. And I wondered, is that a symptom of they want to talk to a human because they don't feel like their questions are getting answered elsewhere? In other words, if they're calling me and asking if the restaurant is open, it probably means they couldn't find that answer on the website, right?
I have an opinion on this one, Dean, and I have an opinion on this one based on 20 years of selling hotels on websites and running websites to do this. I got to tell you, the funniest thing I ever learned, every time we did a redesign, every time we did a content refresh, every time we changed, features and functions on websites for economy, mid-scale, upscale, luxury, independent, chain, across the board. The number one problem people have always had with every website I have ever seen, monitored, worked with, et cetera, is I cannot find the information I'm looking for. And every time you make a change, the number one problem that people have with a website is I cannot find the information I'm looking for. It's very hard, for some set of people, even when the information is there, it is very hard for all of the information to be presented in a way that one specific question that somebody has is the thing that they are able to find most easily, because the different questions people have can vary so widely. This is a universal challenge, and I don't want to say it's always been this way and will always be this way. But in 20 years of doing this, I've never seen that number move dramatically.
Yeah.
Because you can only highlight so much information. It may be there, but it just may be, the seventh bullet in a list of 10, and they missed it as they were looking through the bullets and the like. And that tends to be a pretty consistent problem.
I'll add a little layer to this too, that I maybe because of where I'm at and the geographies and people that I know and friends and so forth, there's a certain reality that's sinking into people now of that there is not this omnipotent control of something, or that there is some guidance, or there is somebody that's in mechanisms to this, that there is a very high uncertainty principle to everything that's going on, but there's a personal impact to people's lives. And it's a tragedy that numbers represent this, but those that are getting sick, those that are getting sick seriously, and those that are being affected by going to the hospitals and even possibly losing people from this are touching more and more lives. From that process comes a certain trustability for the verification. I'm going to want to know, I want to talk to, I want to understand better, because everyone understands from our society that we, as marketers, as politicians, or as anybody, can double speak stuff. Best sale ever, small print. Best thing ever, small print.
Well, and Lauren, I don't mean to cut you off, but that you make a great point about this. Of Melissa was talking about amenities at the property. Right now, if it says our pool is open, if it says our restaurant is open, if it says that our fitness center is open, that was true when you wrote it. Is it true when I'm going to be there? Right? You know what I mean? Like if it doesn't specifically say pool is open on August 14th, or pool, right? Or fitness center is open.
We're going to say what we think is the best thing to say. Not necessarily the complete thing to say. Like, our pool's open, but only 2 people can go in at a time. We didn't say that part. We just said the pool's open because that's what you wanted to hear.
Exactly.
So that verification of talking to somebody or being able to relate to somebody and asking that, because we as humans rely more upon also just how, when you tell when somebody's lying, like, everything's fine, works great.
Totally. The one we always look for. Sorry, this is real quick. What we always look for, and this is the focus group of one, but the one we always look for when we traveled with our kids, when they were a certain age, was adjoining rooms, which to date, you still can't book online anywhere. Obviously, once our kids hit a certain age, the number one thing we as a family were looking for was our kids were desperate to make sure we didn't have adjoining rooms, right? So that was always the kind of trip that prompted a phone call. For other trips, we didn't have to do that because that wasn't important, because we were traveling without our kids, or I was traveling on business, or my wife was traveling on business. And so the specifics of the search, the specifics of the trip, the specifics of the event determine what's important in that moment. And then for all guests right now, what is also taking effect is, how comfortable I feel with the safety protocols generally. What news sources I'm listening to about whether or not this is something I should be taking seriously or not, and all that other kind of stuff that definitely plays a role in there. I have one quick question, Stuart. I know you're going to say something, but I have one quick question. Stephanie, I beg your pardon, Melissa, in question 10, you talk about, which of the following protocols would increase confidence in staying at a property. Do you have information, or are you hearing things, even if it's, from stories you're talking to people and like, of how good a job are hotels doing at conveying that information overall, of the protocols that are most important to people? Are they doing a good job of making it clear to folks that's the stuff they do?
I don't know how clear it is, but it seems that people seem satisfied.
Okay, that works.
Which is maybe it's confirmation bias, if that's what they want to believe. I don't know, but people seem fairly okay with what's going on.
And the other thing to really keep in mind with that specifically is these people that have traveled tend to be more risk tolerant, right? Because they've already traveled during a pandemic. So they're crazy people like Stephanie who's traveled during
Yes.
So, they may be more tolerant of that stuff, or their expectations might be lower on some of that stuff. So it'd be interesting to see over time as more normal folks, not those weirdos like Stephanie, as normal folks start to travel, does that number shift a little bit?
Yeah. High wire over volcano. Yeah, as long as you tell me on the other side is what I want, I'm there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steph. Yeah.
I did want to go back to the conversation about what Tim was saying and what Lauren was saying about people can't find what they're looking for on a website. And I think when we often, as marketers, design our creative and messaging and communication plans, we do it to cater to the lowest common denominator, right? We do it on mass. We try to talk to as many, a wide an audience as possible. And we sometimes lose sight of every individual person has individual thoughts and individual needs and is looking for something specific to them, which is why you get questions at the front desk inevitably from almost everyone that checks in. So it's been interesting to me why there's been a reluctance or a lack of adoption of simple search technology, which is prevalent across every e-commerce site in the world, but hotels haven't embraced it. And we push it to some of our clients, and a couple have adopted it, but you can gain such insight by not just having a search widget to book, but also a keyword search on the top of your website that just lets people type in and easily find what they're looking for. It solves the problem almost every time. And you find insights in terms of the type of content you don't have and what people are really looking for. And you can start to prioritize that content or create that content if you don't have it. So it's a mystery to me that people haven't embraced that more. And
I have a thought on this just based on, again, sample size of one small experience, but it was in my days at Sendent. So we had 7,500 properties. We had, 500,000 rooms and things like that. We actually did conduct a test with regular keyword search.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't do a robust implementation of it because we weren't sure if it was going to work. It was,
well, and it was hard back then, right?
To do it at the time, it was hard and it was expensive. That's exactly right. So we ran a somewhat controlled test. We filtered a very small amount of traffic to it, and every single search we got at the time, and I want to be very clear, this was 15 plus years ago, so this might be a little different today. But every search we got was Orlando, San Diego, Chicago, Anaheim, Disney. They were all location searches. Now, let's be fair. We were a brand with a ton of properties. We had lots and lots of properties. Most people were coming to us. We're looking for a destination and to see what hotels were there. So that may have, it may not be entirely correct, but I completely agree. I think it's an easy enough thing to do now that there's no harm in most hotels having search.
Yeah,
it's not coming
right. Google has products or they're cheap products.
Of course, yeah.
So I'm not trying to make this a sales pitchy thing, but Tim, aren't you involved with something like that?
So first, full disclosure, I am a partner in a software company that mostly does work outside the hospitality industry. But yes, we do provide site search to folks. This is not meant to be a pitch. This is something we talk about a lot, is that site search is the first personalized experience that people have on your website. They're literally asking you for help. A really good thing to do is maybe answer their question and help them, right? The challenge you run into with site search, and we see this on sites all across industries, is site search in many, many, many cases is nothing better than a random web page generator.
Yeah.
Because we do a really bad job of actually answering the question.
And in some cases, a random web page generated with a bunch of ads unrelated to that.
Correct. Exactly right. Exactly right.
It's the worst experience.
Oh, it's the worst experience.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that hospitality as a whole should get better at, because again, here's the simple thing. If you think about a chatbot, if you think about other technologies that people claim are coming, that is also search, just with a different interface.
Yep.
So if you can't get a good search result, you certainly can't get a chatbot to work.
Melissa, were you last week the one that asked about the platform I was bragging about, Phrase? Or yeah, it's kind of the same conversation, with a little bit of it, where it's creating the internalized answer box on your website, and then on top of it, it's finding you, as to Stuart's point, cultivated nuggets of gold of what people are really wanting and interested in, and cultivating that content and moving it into your site for content development. So same premise in that sense.
Yeah. Isn't another option just to kind of come up with an FAQ page, either in conjunction with site search, but having, and then if you put schema on that, if people are using Google and you answer the question, I mean, they don't maybe not even need your site anyways, but I think
people have embraced that, right? I think that's something we've seen much better buy-in from. But I think the two kind of work in concert with each other. They inform each other, right? You start to put new FAQs in based on the queries you're getting, but the content has to exist somewhere, and you're going to find that some people are going to navigate to it naturally, and it can be, we're big proponents of putting the FAQs not just on an FAQ page, but in contextual places throughout the site. So if there's FAQs about the pools, have them on the pools page, for example. So people can discover it, but then other people want to search. So having them search, they'll probably land on the FAQ page. That's how it manifests. But it's how they get to the information. And I think that's a part that's easy to solve and that not many people do.
Right.
My other thing would be to say, listen to the phone calls that you're getting from your guests and work those into the FAQ. I'm saying the site search will have some of the components, but I think really just understanding what people are actually asking and making sure those are front and top of the list right now.
Yeah, there's a really good book by Jay Baer called Utility, so Y-O Utility. He's a really smart guy. He does a lot of research and then applies that to just common sensical marketing. And he had a case study in that book about a pool company that did exactly that. They were struggling. They had no budget. They were getting crushed by the competition. And they literally went and said, okay, it was the owner of the company on his own said, what are all the questions I get asked regularly? And he wrote just down a list of hundreds of questions. He talked to his installers. He talked to the sales folks. And everyone that's interacting with consumers. So in this case, in hotels, it should be your reservation staff. It should be your front desk staff. It should be your maintenance staff. Everyone that's going to talk to guests, compile that list of 100, 200 questions, and then start prioritizing them. And what the pool company did is they just started taking one at a time, and every day or every week they would just write a new article that really robust.
And the videos.
And then they eventually went to videos and got a lot more sophisticated once they got traction. But it started out just writing simple answers and putting that as blogs on their website, and they rapidly became one of the biggest pool resources and companies, businesses. They went from almost going under to massive profits within the space of about 12 months. Because
you're saying answering customer questions is a good idea?
I know, isn't that crazy?
It's crazy talk. That's off the chain on that one. But also to expand that, and this is literally a recent thing that I've been doing. I was mandating that the GMs get on a call with us, and I was asking for 3 questions from a marketing perspective. Where are the people coming from at your front desk? Where are they going? Why are they with you? Just answer those 3 questions for me. Just start giving me some, because it helped with our targeting on what we were doing for marketing for destinations to and froms. 2, it was helping me understand what the purpose of travel was, so we know how to isolate them as well. And it allowed us to begin to put those 3 pieces together. And at first they were sitting there like, well, what's that going to do? It's like, you understand that I have the keys to a spaceship. I don't know where to fly it. You need to tell me where I need to go. And I can go find anybody you want to find if you just tell me who they are.
For the record, if anyone has a spaceship, do not give Lauren the keys to your spaceship.
Give me the keys. Anyways, Melissa, now that we've digressed off of your other conversation, please.
I actually have a question for Melissa about a specific question.
Oh, okay.
Melissa, can you talk about question 12 a little bit?
Question 12 is scrolling. Oh, how soon will you be willing to make the following trips? We've asked this forever, but based on our last conversation when I was on this show, we changed these categories. We swapped out the local staycation type, and we've added in a 1-hour drive. We had the 2-hour drive, and then we added the 3-hour drive, and then broken down by how soon people will travel. And it's a graph that goes like this. The closer you are, the more likely people are to travel. Over 50% are willing to travel up to 1 hour from their house within the next 30 days. And then we slope downwards for every bucket after that. So 40% up to 2 hours, 29% up to 3 hours, etc., all the way down. And I will say this again, as I said, so just looking at the 2-hour category, on our last survey, when we sort of hit not rock bottom, but we hit pretty low on the last survey, we were down at 28%, but now we're back up to 40%. So
that shows the impact the media has, right? Because if you remember, right at the beginning, first couple of weeks of July, everyone was just on the wrong path. There was the big debate about masks. There were a lot of articles coming out in the mainstream media about certain destinations being a petri dish of just disease, and everyone got a little skittish, and we saw a big swing. We'd been on this upward trajectory of confidence, and it took us back almost to the beginning. But it's recovered a lot quicker this time. It kind of just went down, up, and now we're kind of back on that trajectory.
So if you're a hotel and you're watching this, and that's the fact of what you're seeing, what recommendations would folks have about that? What should people be doing differently as hotel marketers or as hoteliers about that?
Target the crap geographically out of those people within your 1 to 3 hour drive market.
Right.
Do a jolly good job.
So in terms of doing that, what are some options for that people should be aware of?
So one, hopefully you have a really great CRM system where you can segment your very awesome email database and send targeted messages towards those people, whether it's through display retargeting, whether it's through social targeting. There's so many options. The technology is out there to be able to target geographically, for sure.
To Stuart's point on one thing, hey, Mr. Ed, hey, Miss Tammy, by the way, Tammy from Milestone and Edward Center Flip to. So now we're hearing about fall being the worst public health issue coming up, that this fall will be the worst. The CDC chair flat out says we're going to expect the worst. It's going to be a big cluster. Does that mean we have an artificial wall coming up? Because as Stuart said, media's influence, you can see it. So now all of a sudden media is pushing their next tragedy, which is fall. Guess what? Fall's terrible, fall's bad, fall's going to be the worst. Go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, let's be fair. The media, and I agree with Stuart generally on this, but specifically the media is simply saying what the CDC director has said. So,
all good, yes. But,
but they also have a narrative to push, right? That if it bleeds, it leads. That's the mantra.
Yeah, our media is based on sensationalism, not on reporting. That went with Walter Cronkite.
And I don't want to start a debate about the media because I don't think that's the point. I do think there's a difference between when the media highlights a story and when a public health official who is a top doctor in the country says, hey, this is something that's going to be a real problem.
For sure, but also health officials are saying other things like if you correlate, like I was looking at a chart this morning of the state of South Carolina and the cases based on whether or not there were mask mandates or not. And you literally can see a correlation across the board. It is undeniable that in every area where masks are being enforced, the cases are going down to the point where in our area, which was quote unquote the cesspool of COVID at one point, now has our hospitals at maybe 10% capacity of ventilators and stuff. We've got this under control with simple tactical changes, but everywhere that's not is dealing with the problems we were dealing with.
By the way, that is a message.
The media's not reporting it
now better, for sure.
There are multiple narratives that the media is choosing the scariest one because it sells.
Sure.
Right. Well, in the practicalities of this, you have what you report to as Tim is like, this is a fact, this is a statement. Media, to Stuart's point, is on sensationalism because it drives awareness of what they are. And then you have the others that are on the other end that are marketers that are saying, don't worry, it's fine.
Yeah.
Come visit, come travel. So we're on this end over it. You get the politicians going, where's most of the people? Because that's where I want to be, because I want to get reelected.
But I think this goes back to Melissa's point of it's incumbent on hotels, it's incumbent on DMOs, it's incumbent on folks like that to provide accurate information about the reality.
That's the biggest thing. That's the thing I want to bring out. It's like what Melissa's talking about from the very beginning we first started talking about this. We should be the authorities of our own truth. What we say about what we're capable of doing, what we are doing, what's in around our market is being done and so forth. We should be the point of truth for what people are asking us as questions. We, of anybody, should be the one that says, regardless of the pendulum swings and the disparities.
Were you going to say paradigm?
I was. I cut it off. You're gonna jump on me. I was like, I'm going to take it out. The truth of it. So we don't have our own paradigm.
Tammy, you started to say something a moment ago.
Well, no, I was just gonna, and I joined late, so it's probably RC too. But you guys are so spot on. I've been looking to try and figure out, could we take a day or two, a weekend getaway or something, and the number of websites I've gone to that have no information about what's going on, talk about all the kids activity, all the stuff that I know isn't there, but they're still not only talking about, but there's no information at all. It's really difficult from a consumer perspective, to the point that I have not booked a trip, and I'm in the industry and I want to go somewhere, right?
And
because
you
I'm
could
just
be persuaded with the right information.
exactly
Yeah.
with the right information. The things, all I want is a nice little, bathtub, maybe a hot tub to go into. Like there's little tiny things that would just persuade us to book, and we haven't. Partially because, frankly, a lot of the websites I've gone to just don't have the information that I need as a consumer.
So let's break that down. It's uncertainty, right? Uncertainty is what's creating doubt, and that can easily be overcome with information. If you give reassurance and provide facts that eliminate some of those fears, you move from someone that's shopping and dreaming to someone that's booking. It's very simple. It's basic marketing. And I think the challenge is a lot of hotels right now are just still running around with a chicken with their head cut off, and they've got people that are probably still on furlough or laid off or let go completely, that were usually doing the messaging or updating the website, and they either don't know, the people left don't know how to do it or don't have time to do it because GMs are manning the front desks. So
right, and not trying to bash the brands by any means, but that's one of the challenges that you run into. Go and pull up any brand website, brand hotel around.
Let's bash them. Let's see what's happening. Definitely squirmed in her chair a little bit.
Go pull up any brand website for any branded hotel in your local market where you're at, and look at it. And you find that they're typically a cookie cutter template, right? They have content that is specific to that property about where it's located, the amenities and things like that. But you can't go on there, and the individual hotel can't go on there to customize it and say, yeah, that attraction across the street is open, closed, whatever the case may be. And trying to get that somebody from corporate to do that is very difficult. In their defense, trying to do that individually across 4,000 hotels in the country is very difficult, practically impossible. But it's a conundrum, right? Because, well, hotel can't have control over it. Corporate doesn't have the resources to do it. What do you do?
Oh, wait, I can go ahead, Steph. You're better at this one.
Marriott is just now rolling out a new module just for COVID. 5 months into the pandemic, but it's landing pages to talk about their COVID stuff. And I was like, hey, now that we can actually add something custom, 5 months after this started, cool.
So here's the hope of your moment. I am competing with two hotels, branded hotels, and I will remain them nameless. I'm competing with them. They are hiding behind their COVID badge, that even when people are calling them, they're saying, oh, everything's fine, everything's open, or pool's open, everything's fine, even though there is a municipal mandate that the pool is actually still closed. So they're lying. Everything's fine, but do understand it's COVID-19. We don't know when situations change. And they're hiding behind their badge, and when they show up at the property, oh, I'm sorry, the pool's, it's closed. They're hiding behind it so that they sell the room, and the people show up and tell them the real what's going on.
Now, when you say they, is this the property or a corporate?
Property, the property. Yeah. They're hiding behind that they can't change their brand site. The big banner says COVID-19. There's things that have changed over. You can call the property. This was brought to my attention from one of the hotels as my client, that when they do their test calls and so forth, this is what they're doing. The hotel is actually answering everything's fine and open until they show up, and then they tell them what's changed.
It's such a short-sighted approach.
Yeah. Hey, Lauren. Are they actually talking to the hotel? Or a lot of the branded hotels.
They're actually talking to the hotel.
Okay, because I was curious if maybe the issue is that they're being transferred to a.
No, I thought so too. Maybe just central res, generic. Yeah, I don't know. No. They can't even hide behind that of saying we don't know enough about the hotel to tell you. This is actually reaching the local number, talking to the hotel. They're deceptively saying everything's fine without giving them the updates.
So the key takeaway here is don't lie to your guests. I mean, right? Let's just start with that.
Well, if Adele was on, she would talk about how that's going to lead to an increase in negative reviews because they're lying to their guests. And so, yes, in the short term, I may make a few bucks, but in the long term, I'm really hurting the hotel.
Also, the moral of the story is, as a consumer, read the reviews, because they're going to tell you the information that the hotel won't.
Right.
While that is true, I think it's been at least a lot of my hotels have gotten unfairly hit with fair volume of negative reviews right now. You know, I think there are some consumers out there that don't try to educate themselves before they travel, or they have, I don't know.
Let's
I don't
pretend
want to blame the consumer by any means, but it's, they just assume, you know, if I go, I don't know what their assumptions are, but I feel like the volume of negative reviews has been.
COVID's all fake. It's drummed up by the media. So I want my 20,000 rashers of bacon with my breakfast buffet. Damn it, because that's what I expect.
Hey, don't take away my bacon.
Yeah, like why don't you have your buffet open? And you're like,
Right, but I think this is a perfect example of it. You talk in marketing all the time about how you want to surprise and delight. Mm-hmm. At the moment, the best way to delight is not to surprise.
Yeah, right.
People should know what they're going to get. They should know what the right expectation is, and you should be able to meet that expectation. Mm-hmm. If you're not doing that, you're going to get bad reviews. You're going to get people saying negative things about it. Then you're probably never going to be that guest again.
Yeah, and we've been encouraging. I mean, we've talked about how to keep your own website update, but there, you know, with the people, the different types of travelers that we're getting through the OTAs, I've been encouraging a lot of our hotels, you know, to go in and use the automated messaging through Booking. And so kind of like the pre-stay email messaging that you can automate through ExpediaandBooking.com, so that you can share those specifics about your pool, about breakfast. And again, just so you can align those expectations for those type of guests where you don't have those minutia details that you can put on your own website.
So Tim Coleman in the comments asked a really interesting question. He said, you know, could this be the exact reason that hotels are losing out to short-term rental markets currently? Hotels are knowingly lying to their guests before arrival. I mean, I think it's less about the lying and it's more about just the fact that people can't get the questions that they need answered, as Melissa was talking about. But I'd love to hear, you know, other people's thoughts on that.
Well, I can tell you that just even from a localization point, I'm talking to Richard, by the way, Richard Farrar, in our chat. When he's talking about the local drive market to one of his hotels in Fort Lauderdale compared to where they're getting it from. We have a thing here in Southwest Florida that where a lot of people come from the East Coast because of the lockdowns that have been occurring over in Miami to get out, because they actually have curfews and so forth. They had curfews. And so they come over here, but they were never informed by the hotels that if you're not a resident, you can't go to certain beaches. I mean, you just can't. Ta-da! Guess what? You came over, but you can't go anywhere. And you can only be at the hotel, or that's it. And then also the fact that if you were trying to go to public parking, if you weren't a resident, you couldn't actually go to public parking. They would not allow you to get a parking ticket. None of that was conveyed by the hotels, who were just happy to get the business that would show up and pay to stay in a room. They didn't also talk about the restaurants that were closed that also did not offer delivery, because a lot of the restaurants in certain markets were actually bars that served a little bit of food, and they can't exist in their current environment because the bars were shut down. So a lot of the things, to Richard's point of what to do when you get there, rather than just sit in your room, didn't exist. And then for a while there was actually times that the beaches were open and closed. Like you could be at the beach until 11 a.m. and then you had to leave the beach and come back at 5 o'clock for the sunset. I'm not making this up. This really is how some of the beaches were being handled. And so everybody piled into the pool at the hotel, and there's no mask requirement. Ta-da! All good stuff. None of that was being shared on, well, there were a few. I'm not going to say everybody.
But the good news is, Lauren, all those people went back to Miami and got their COVID test, and it counted against Miami, not against the hotel. I mean, come on.
Oh, good.
Actually, the big concern right now is, you know, we're expected to have a very active, severe hurricane season because, you know, 2020. And the concern is if one points at Miami and they have to evacuate Miami, that's going to cause a massive COVID issue in the rest of the state. Because if you look at the numbers right now, most of the COVID cases are still that Miami area. It's very contained to that area. Like our big case count this past week, half of the cases were from Miami. And so, you know, there is a challenge, like you're saying, where you don't want to bar Miami people from going elsewhere, but you kind of want to make it not attractive. And the governments are doing that. They're putting in these wacky things that you as a hotel have to communicate, or you're going to just permanently burn your relationship with anyone you do get at this point, and potentially permanently drag down your review scores.
So I'm going to throw out a loaded question because I'm curious what people think about this. You know, what we're seeing right now. You know, everybody talks about when we get. You know, we're in new and unprecedented times, but you know, we have to have a new normal and all this other kind of stuff. Maybe this is the new normal. Maybe there will be hot spots in periods. Maybe there will be places where it gets better for a time, etc. That's what we've been seeing over the last 6 months, right? 5 months, where you get periods where your market is doing great, you get periods where your market is doing less well. If that's the fact, if that's a reality we may be living with for a while yet to come, as marketers, you know, what can hotels do differently to kind of communicate, hey, all clear at the moment, not so clear now, kind of thing, you know, thoughts? Or is the premise of the question, you know, you're all like, nah, it's crap, there's going to be a vaccine on Monday and on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think one, adopt a methodology in marketing that you always should have done, which is your marketing is never done. You should always be looking at how you're communicating, always looking at the journey, the digital journey you're presenting to your guests and asking questions. Are you relevant? Are you adding value? Are you helping move them into, becoming a guest? These are things our industry are notorious for just saying, oh, check, website's done. Oh, check. Social media calendar pre-built, and just saying it's done. I did it. I completed the project. Where we all know that the best marketers are always, going through and adding, changing, rethinking. So go back to marketing 101, and that will help you quite a bit in these unprecedented times.
So speaking
I'll add to that, I literally had a conversation today with a client who brought in their marketing professional. It was an ownership group that had their marketing guy come in.
And, we can all see where this is going already. Right?
Yeah.
And they wanted their annual budget. And I said I wasn't going to do it. And he asked me why. He says, are you trying to hide behind what you want to spend? I'm like, absolutely not. But I don't want to waste my time putting paper that you're just going to put by a toilet anyway. Because, well, he wasn't all that impressed. Anyway.
Anyone who calls himself an expert, first of all, that's going to be an interesting conversation.
The idea of it is that
wear it on the future then.
Yeah, it's adaptive. I mean, every day is going to be different because one minute you're targeting a market, and then all of a sudden you're not targeting the market because that market is no longer desirable. I don't want Miami over here right now. I don't want to market to them to come over right now, even though I know they're ripe to come over to a market, to a hotel. But I do want to target people that are willing to travel for the circumstances they want to travel for and the distance they want to travel by. And that's going to constantly change, and the cost of getting in front of them is going to change, and the channels that are most effective are going to change. So as you do it, you're constantly changing. But when you do it, I'll expand on Ed's one thing. It's not just one path you're taking. You're doing one path, but you're planning for 5. You're looking at, if I do have to shift over to the left, what are we going to be doing about that? If it does dry up, if that feeder market does dry up, or we turn into the hotspot, what is our modality at that point? What are we looking to do to compensate for that actually happening? If it doesn't, great. If it does, at least we got a first step. So I would say that there's a multi-branch to this aspect as well.
I would add to that as well the fact that we know something's going to happen somewhere, right? That's just inevitable. It will. It's sorry to say, but it's the truth.
Well, when you say anything that generally, that is always true. Something will happen somewhere.
Well, what I mean by that is somebody will be a new hotspot. Somebody will.
Kidding.
Right? And I'm a supporter of the direct booking movement. I think everybody on this call probably is, but I think we can all agree that it's going to be more important now than ever, because as that happens and as you're having to shift those strategies and oops, you know what, my health club is going to be closed next week. Okay, I want to be the one communicating that to my guests. I don't want to put that in the hands of anybody else to do that. So I think we have to exponentially increase our focus on direct bookings.
Yeah, in real-time communication. The other thing I would say to Tim's original question about how do we prepare, or what do we do, knowing that we're probably going to have to ride this out for a little bit longer. We're in probably a 12-round match with Mike Tyson, and he's punched us right in the nose a couple of times already. And
there goes your plan.
Yes, he's instead, right? Was all the budgeting that we did last year has gone out the window after the first punch, and he's probably going to get a few more licks in if we can last the 12 rounds. But you cannot lose sight of that there are going to be resurgences in your area. There are going to be restrictions lifted and changed and new regulations. But you've got to keep your community, your tight community of staff members and guests at the forefront of your decisions, especially the staff. So you should, regardless of what your situation is now, if the cases are low or high in your area, you've got to operate as if they're always high. You've got to protect everyone on staff and always be cautious, because the tricky thing about this little bugger of a disease is that you don't know when it's really beginning to flare up until a couple of weeks later, because the way the symptoms don't show, the way it incubates, there can be a 2-week lag. So you might be sitting there again, we can let our guard down, we can lax some of our operational processes, and then all of a sudden you've got 20% of your staff have COVID. So really act very cautiously for the next, until there is some kind of permanent resolution to this. And that's the new normal that I think Tim's talking about. We have to assume that COVID's all around us. Don't stop what you're doing, but adapt to what you're doing with that realization.
So you don't recommend like hotels like follow suit of like the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and just cancel everything? And
I don't think that's viable for a lot of businesses.
Well, the other also is realizing that we don't have control over some of the dialogue. Well, a lot of the dialogue, really. But remember when we had the fear of bed bugs? Well, you can get somebody to just talk about. Oh, I got told that one of the staff members got COVID.
Yeah.
Holy jeez, what are we gonna do with that? By the time you even address it, whether it's accurate or not accurate, or whether whatever. So being in front of this with what you're doing is for protocol, how you're trying to make sure your team is safe, how you're trying to make your guests safe. Take the leadership stand that says, I'm sorry, there's no local ordinance for me to hide behind that says I have to make you wear a mask. But as the business operator and the choice of doing business for you, I'm mandating that everybody that's a guest of our hotel wear a mask. If you are not willing to comply with that, I'm going to refund your money and kick you out of our hotel. Thank you. Have a great day. And just realize that whether they think it's God-given right or not.
Tweak the messaging and delivery a little, but yeah, generally.
Oh, come on.
Just make sure if you're going to go that route, you're also hardcore in your staff, because nothing will land you in hot water more than being a hardcore approach, and then having 50 reviews on Google and TripAdvisor saying that your staff is walking around with their face masks around their chins, and
you know what a slogan is? I have one of my clients right now. Nothing under the nose. They sent some pictures where some of the staff members had their masks under the nose. Mm-hmm. I'm like, dude, don't. They're in the they're doing things with the clients. I'm like, what's with this? And they're like, well, they had the mask. I was like, no, they don't. So we had to pull the pictures down. I was like, don't put that.
It makes me sad. It just makes me sad.
Yeah.
But see, and that's part of the problem, right? You still have people that either A, don't know how to wear a mask appropriately, right? The chin, or like my chin cover, or don't think it's a big deal. What about that sheriff in Florida that has said you can't even come into my police station if you're wearing a mask? Okay, I don't like the political. But so that
Florida.
I personally, I know.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with what you started with. Yeah. Sheriff in Florida.
But the challenge is not every business is going to go that route, right? Not every owner is going to say, I'm willing to walk away from revenue by enforcing the masks. Not every, to Ed's point, then, okay, let's say they do say that. Then you have the staff that don't. I mean, if you're getting pictures from people for your websites, for your social, that show people with masks that are below their nose, around the chin,
you're doing it wrong. Right. You're doing so much damage by doing that, because first of all, it's incredibly ignorant. I'd rather you say no masks than wear a mask incorrectly in your photography, because you're perpetrating just the core issue here, which, I mean, in all actuality, wearing no mask, you're at least taking some type of reasonable stance. And it's politically, you can argue whether or not it's right. I mean, the sheriff in Florida, by the way, I will just say he is in a county that has almost no cases. Because the state of Florida is freaking gigantic, and there are very large swaths of the state that no one goes to from outside the area, and there are no cases. But showing incorrect usage of mask, allowing your staff to be lax, you're putting out there that it's okay to cheat. Like, oh look, wink, wink, we're wearing masks.
And it's more pernicious than that too, because it also the whole point of mask wearing, whether you believe in it or not, it has a psychological impact on all the people that are fearful. And one of the questions we ask, and eventually we'll get back to Melissa's questions, but is about fears, right? And you see the motivators or the things that are preventing people from travel are fear of public spaces, fear of interactions with guests. It's fear, right? Those are the things preventing people from traveling. So by saying I'm going to wear a mask, you'll start a little bit. It's a psychological battle. You're telling them we're reassuring you that we're doing things to protect you. But as soon as you say we're doing some things to protect you, but are we really? Then you start creating more doubt, which creates more fear, right? So, well, if they're not wearing their masks, are they not sanitizing their hands? Are they not cleaning the rooms? Are they not doing all the other stuff they say they're doing? So it's infinitely worse to show masks.
It shows that you can't be trusted.
Yeah, exactly.
And that will hit you in every aspect of it. Like Stuart likes to say, do or do not, there is no try.
Richard made some good comments off to the side. One was the addressing of lost group business and so forth, which we'll make sure we don't lose track of. But the other is, he said he heard a GM tell one of his housekeepers that she had to wear a mask in the hallway but could remove it in the guest room. Really?
Why? If she's not around people, what is the point?
Yeah, I think that's okay.
Okay. Well, I think that
masks are meant to stop human to human transmission when you can't be far apart. If you're alone in a room, why is a mask needed when you're alone in a room?
Two critical components to that, and that is so that there's no negative airflow. Whatever's in there is residually in there. You're putting your housekeeper at risk because you don't know what the person is that was in the room while they're in there. There's a durability to it in the air that they're already saying is lasting longer than we're anticipating. It goes farther than we anticipated before. And regardless of whether we discount surface contact and biofilm and all the other conversations we had, there's a residual of not knowing when she walks in. If you told her it's okay to walk in and the guest just walked out, what difference does it make that she didn't have a mask on? A lot. She's breathing whatever he just left or she just left for a duration of time. Where it would be better just to be consistent in saying, wear your mask at all times while you're working. Because we're putting you exposed to people, regardless of time, or whether in front of you or distancing, that you are inhaling or potentially inhaling what was left behind from them. We don't know what the condition is of our guest.
So, but this brings up an interesting point and brings us full circle back to what we were talking about before. And Melissa, you got data around this, right? The thing, see what I did there? The thing that comes up a lot is people aren't traveling because there's a lot of uncertainty, right? The fact that we're having discussions and debates about whether people should mask or not mask or how it gets transmitted or not transmitted or things like that speaks to a lot of the uncertainty that exists at the moment. Melissa, can you talk about some of the things you saw in terms of the uncertainty that you saw in the data and what people are saying about what's causing them to have issues traveling and things like that?
So, well, yes, but before we do that, I do want to talk about masks for just a minute longer because we asked that question again on this survey about how a mandatory mask ordinance would impact travel plans. And we saw a huge shift from the last time we asked this question. We are still having about half that's saying, I don't care, my decision is unchanged. But in the last survey, we were pretty split between I would be more or less likely to travel to that destination versus less. On this survey, we're at 35% saying I'd be more likely to travel versus 19% that would be less likely to travel there.
That's a huge shift.
That is a huge shift.
In 3 weeks.
Yeah.
In 3 weeks' time.
And if you think about the timing of when the first time we asked that question was right in the beginning of July when this debate was probably at its peak about masks. There were people that had resisted putting in mask ordinances. There were people that were just beginning to do it. And the science was getting a little less fuzzy, right? There was some clarity coming out on data that showed, okay, this is why scientists have changed their recommendation. even though Ed thinks it's a government conspiracy, I think scientific consensus.
No, I think for person-to-person transmission, regardless of what the science says, why risk it? Just wear a mask.
Which I think a lot of people are coming to that realization. But we were in the heat of the battle right then, and the fear was at the highest. So I think that's why we saw it so evenly split. But it's good to see that rationality has kind of leveled out a little better, and more people are.
Can you also agree that wearing a mask is not a substitute for social distancing? Because I've lost track of the number of times that I've gone to a store and I'm looking at something, and some person comes reaching right in front of me in my space, and my Samuel Jackson comes out 6 feet. Unfortunately, my wife, she wasn't amused, but that's how it goes.
By the way, I am at the bottom of the hour, but I just want to say this is a great discussion. You guys are doing great, so I'm going to leave you to it. Hope you all have a great rest of the week. I'm going to read through great rest of the week, great weekend rather. I'm going to read through the rest of the results, Melissa, and you're going to see some of those show up on the site.
Tim, if people want to know more about you, your podcast, and what you do, where is it they can find you, sir?
They can find me at timpeter.com. The podcast is timpeter.com/podcast. I'm Tim Peter on pretty much every social channel except for Twitter, where I am TC Peter for reasons that are lost to the annals of time.
And timpeter.com now looks like a modern website instead of something that was built in the 1990s now.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. I will let you know that site was built not in the 1990s.
It just looked like.
I mean, but Stuart, to be fair, he at least kept the the late 90s logo color.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, he didn't completely go away.
I just wasn't a fan of the hit counter at the bottom.
You're allowed to have other colors than blue, folks. It's not the only color.
What are you talking about? There is no other color but blue.
Great seeing y'all. Have a great weekend.
Have a good weekend.
As always. Well, with that, it's a myth that Tim and Melissa are not the same person. Okay.
So Melissa, do you want to address Tim's question before you left about the uncertainty? Because there's some good questions around fears and things like that.
Well, as per every round of this, we do have our word cloud, of course, that we ask what people are thinking about traveling, at the moment. And safety it's still at the forefront. It has not changed size. It is the number one word. We still have fear. We still have risky. We still have all these sort of negative connotations with a few scatterings of relaxation and relaxing, but also masks are what people are thinking about. And, we haven't had tons and tons of change here.
It's well, it looks like it's skewed back to more prevalence of negativity than you had a couple of your versions had some emergence of positivity coming in,
and then they just went
and
away.
Then it's gone back to why is zero
I don't know.
a prevalent word? Is it just O?
No, it's zero. It's 0 cases and things like that.
Okay.
Just want to make sure that
word is nope. That's my favorite.
Nope.
Nope.
Just want to make sure that he wanted to tell you that he appreciates very much your word cloud. He said if he didn't make it back by the time we brought that up, that he wanted to let you know he loves the word cloud function on that. So
it's also fun to turn the word cloud into sentences. It's scary fun. Ready, risky.
I broke that word cloud down by people who have traveled versus people who have not traveled. And those who have not traveled, additionally, not surprisingly, had more negative things, but they also had nervous, uncertain, and fear were pretty prevalent in the word cloud of those people who have not yet traveled.
I really liked your question 13 that comes up next there about where people would travel within the next month. And being from a small town takes the dominant stage there of people traveling. So more power to them. I love that. But also, I think that's an opportunity for a lot of people who are not in the major cities, a lot of hotels that are not in the major cities, where maybe before they were going away from you to go to the major city, hey, now you can reverse that flow a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, this is the first time small town has been the #1 spot. It's been beach destinations and somewhere in nature, followed by small town. So it's interesting that that has now taken over the top spot there.
Well, and I wonder how much of that plays into where we are in the seasons of travel. Right. You know, I mean, because it's when you think beach destination, especially your audience specifically, it's really, really hot right now.
Yeah.
We've gotten some good engagement on the social side for some hotels, talking about, I wouldn't say off the beaten path because that's too generic, but the wine vineyards, the farmers markets, the road trip destination stuff, countryside driving, discoverable things that are not downtown centric, urban centric, attraction centric, museums and event. It's about, okay, when you get here, beyond being here, this is some other things that are just kind of fun that you don't have to be really engaged with a lot of places or people. You can keep good distancing, but they're pretty cool things to go do, like farmers markets. I know it sounds really silly, but I keep pointing it out because that was one of the strongest ones we've got people engaged with on the social platform. People, just the cool idea of going somewhere and then traipsing out into the countryside and hitting a couple of markets because of seasonal things that are being sold at the time.
Mm-hmm.
To your idea of small town, it's not like going to the small town. This is actually outside of a city, but they're going outside of the city area to go do these things. So it's been kind of interesting that connects to it. And then Ellis, made a comment in our chat saying sentiment increasing aligned with parents finding out they need to homeschool.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, I've already seen some of our partners have already started their shoulder season campaigning on bring the kids, learn from the beach type thing, because let's face it, I mean my kids, their school got kicked till the end of the month. They were supposed to go back this last week, and it got delayed because the principal had COVID. Yeah, I know, right? But I will say, like, we're starting to feel it. The kids have been primarily home since the second week of March because they were on spring break before all the lockdowns started. So they had an extra week of that. And yeah, it's getting tough. They're getting a little slap happy.
Mm-hmm.
My son's going to miss the first week of kindergarten because he was exposed to COVID at camp and we're back in quarantine.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's really great to be in quarantine when you move into a house when you have no furniture and you're still waiting for your furniture to be delivered. When you have no toys and nothing.
Boxes. If you just moved, you've got boxes. They're the best toys for that 5-year-old age.
I don't even have boxes. So I have internet.
Amazon Prime.
Start buying some stuff.
Just go to Kids Toys, same day delivery. You get boxes and toys. You win.
And I do think the back to school thing's an opportunity in a couple of ways. One, I think you're right, Ed, in that everyone's doing it differently, but a lot of schools are still going to be doing remote learning, and there is an opportunity to get people to leave their house to go to educate their kids and work in the morning, swim in the afternoon, or whatever.
Yep.
But I also think the media is going to change its attention, and you're already beginning to see it. Travel was the big villain in spreading COVID early on in the last month or two, but the media is going to be like a hawk as schools reopen. They're already seeing these stories bubble up about where the hotspots are. So media might be a little distracted.
And hopefully at some point the media shifts to the fact that it is an election year. Maybe they'll actually start focusing on, I don't know, the election. And give us a little bit of a reprieve.
You didn't realize that COVID coverage is about the election. It's all a Democratic ploy to get Trump out of office. You didn't hear it?
I will say I got a full education on QAnon this morning by someone who firmly believes in it. Woo-wee!
I listened to a podcast called "Stuff They Don't Want You to Know," and it's full of QAnon stuff. It's very interesting.
On another, I told you that those hotels in Indianapolis were talking to the local school boards about creating satellite nexuses for their conference spaces. Mm-hmm. And it kind of twisted into a new dialogue of creating those nexuses for students that do not have computers.
Mm.
Because the conferences have the big screen, what's missing is a camera. I mean, there's some technicality. I mean, there's always logistics to this stuff. But for those families that don't have the technical facilities available, but they can have the ability to bring their kids to these little nacelle potential education things, the dialogue's now been advanced to how do we address them, because they can be served food and they can be left in a room and isolated from the rest of the hotel, and they can be operated. There's some outdoor space for them to go to. The days are shortened anyway because it's mainly about class education time and all this other stuff. But if they can start providing a service to a community that is vastly underserved right now, which is the families that do not have the financial means to have the technology necessary for remote learning. I mean, I'm hoping that this thing comes through, because man, I will be pumping the PR out of that.
I just heard from a property that is trying to turn their meeting space into sort of a kid virtual drop-off for the parents to go enjoy themselves while they have a proctor in the meeting space that can watch as kids do their virtual work for a few hours a day.
I like that.
It was really
a couple of venues here have done that to help working, and it's actually meant for working families. These venues are large enough that the kids can have, pretty substantial social distancing. They brought in a couple of team members who are, registered, professionals on dealing with children. And it's literally, hey, you got to go to work and your kids got to do homeschooling. So here, you can bring them
It's not
here.
homeschooling, it's virtual learning. There's a distinct difference between virtual learning and homeschooling, just to clarify.
There is? Is virtual learning done at home? Because it's homeschooling then. I'm sorry. If you're unable,
active participation from the parent, virtual learning shouldn't require nearly as much active participation from the parent.
Homeschooling, you still have to go through and have your own curriculum and develop your own, all that stuff. So
see, the state of Florida has had resources for families who wanted to homeschool their kids but keep them in a real curriculum where, like, it's Florida Virtual School. So you didn't have to develop your own curriculum if you didn't want to, but if you didn't want your kid going to the school, you could do that. So, but it's at home. And if you both work full-time jobs where you can't be home, you now have a new problem, which is, having someone, take care of your kids and help them through their, coursework. Because I'm sorry, if you have young kids or kids who struggle, who need special attention on certain things, then you basically are homeschooling your kids because you have to help them through the virtual coursework.
Q4 of last year, I had to learn a lot about the American Revolution that I had totally forgotten 20 years ago. we're just, are you smarter than a fifth grader? No, probably not.
Nope, not even close. So another aspect of marketing, which has come up a little bit now, is, and this came out of a New York Times article recently, which was reaffirmation for me, is why do I live here? But the change in the work requirements of in-office or not necessarily in office, or being at home because it's, out of a hotspot situation, and or the fact that the company isn't bringing people back into the office environment again, a lot of people are doing real estate shifts.
Mm-hmm. And it's actually a huge problem right now because inventory is super low. Yeah. Demand is super high. Like last month in Florida, sales were up 21%, but available inventory was down like 18%.
Yeah,
and it's caused there's almost a real estate gridlock happening here.
Yeah. We're experiencing down here because a lot of people are coming to the market in explore.
You're in Florida, right?
No, well, Southwest Florida.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
But I'm saying in the sense of people coming to get out of the Miami Metro, Tampa Metro, they're coming down looking for homes in this area. Because it's like, what, I don't want to live I want to live down there. And that's what's coming up through.
Which actually is going to have a few really interesting repercussions to it. One, it's going to shift the political landscape of the country to where you're going to see more democratic kind of growth in areas that have been traditionally conservative, Republican. Which will, kind of be interesting to mix that pot a bit. I think it's needed to get these people face to face. But two, I think states like New York and California are in for a very long-term fiscal crisis, because let's face it, it's not the lower income that are going to move out of California. It's the higher income that are going to move out of California because they can remote work now and live in an area that they're not paying the California taxes. They're not, doing any of that. And New York and California are incredibly dependent on their tax base. And even with it, they can't, kind of dig out of some of the sins of the past with like, their different retirement plans and things like that were, choking them.
So I was talking to my realtor yesterday because we're one of those crazy people that's selling and buying a house during a pandemic, which if anyone wants to move to Myrtle Beach, I have a house for sale, by the way. So he was telling me that he literally last week sold a house on Zoom. He did a virtual walkthrough of $1 million house in Myrtle Beach to someone moving from New York.
Wow.
They've never seen it. They put an offer in on the spot and they're going to close and move down here.
Well, partly because that house they saw for $1 million was 7 times the size of the house they have in New York.
Probably so.
And had land and
and a lot lower taxes. Yeah.
Well, and so that's going to have some interesting long-term effect on our economy, on our political landscape. COVID is going to leave just years and years of change, and it's going to be really interesting to try and track. And why I'm bringing this up is not just, oh, look, it's happening. It's going to change how you market. What a geo looks like is under a massive dynamic switch already. So a geo where previously you said, oh, they were, middle income, whatever, you may blink and all of a sudden their income level of that zip code has gone up substantially because a bunch of Google people, moved and are working remote now out of that area. It's going to be kind of this few years of you can't trust any of your historical marketing data, especially as it relates to geo.
We've talked a lot about, throwing out the old playbook. And you used a Yoda quote earlier. I'll use another one. You've got to unlearn what you've learned, right? You've got to pretend like, and I said this on the show a couple of weeks ago, you were just transported to an entire another planet. You just opened a new hotel that isn't the same hotel you're working at before, and you're targeting a completely new audience because that's the reality you're facing now. Yep. What people want, what they need, what you offer is fundamentally different.
You have new landmines to navigate.
Completely new. You have to, if you've been furloughed and you just came back to the same job, or if you've stayed there the whole time, you need to come in with a new mindset and say, if this was brand new, I was starting today, I forget everything I've learned. How do I approach this? That's how you're going to have to tackle the next 6 months at least.
Yeah. Even add to that point is like I said, I have a cluster of hotels, different places. The one hotel that succeeded early on best was the one that actually had a restaurant inside of it, and compared to those that didn't, because it was an easier solution for people to say, okay, so if the hotel's doing that, then the restaurant's doing that, and I can get food from the restaurant. And so it was an easier solution for them than saying that is the restaurant out a couple blocks away still open or whatever. It was an easier answer for them.
Yeah, convenience.
I think I think to your point, hotels that do have their restaurants open right now, it seems that they're having a higher capture ratio of their in-house guests than what they had before. So a lot of hotels are like, oh, we can't open our restaurant yet because I said, but your old data, like you have to think about what your new potential capture ratio is to that point, Lauren, because I do think there are more people that are just more comfortable staying in the hotel and walking downstairs to eat versus, going out.
Yeah.
Right.
If there's outdoor seating.
So Melissa, I know that Richard is eager to hear more information from you because he already asked me for the link back to what you're talking about because he loves your data. So
it's at the top of the chat.
I know, but I put it in the bottom as well. I just dropped it in just in case you didn't see it.
Well, let's talk about cleaning protocols because this is a new question that we asked, and we asked how different protocols would change the confidence in staying at a property. And so we asked about leaving the room vacant for 24 hours between guests, for 48 hours between guests, putting the seal across the room after it's been cleaned, a deep cleaning between guests, providing toiletries at check-in versus having them in the room, putting the TV remote in a sanitized bag, and an option to check in via mobile app because, you know, we had to throw that in there. Overwhelmingly, there are two things that stood out that would have a drastically increased confidence level. One was a deep cleaning between guests, whereas leaving the room vacant for 24 to 48 hours was only 25 to 31%, with a greatly increased. The deep cleaning was almost 70% of people said that that would increase their confidence.
And the great thing about that is it's such an ambiguous, and we were deliberate with this because we're toying with messaging. So this is as much about perception, because as we've discussed on the show before, there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence. There's a lot of indirect contact spread of this disease. So what a deep cleaning really means is somewhat nebulous, somewhat ambiguous.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, because like if you were truly saying what some of these are probably thinking, it's sanitization versus
For sure.
versus a cleaning, as we learned about biofilm.
For sure. Win the poop episode, yeah.
Yes.
But we can use that as marketing experts, right, in our messaging and change our protocols to classify it as a deep clean. That's going to have way more impact and be less costly, less problematic than,
and by the way,
24 hours vacant, which
make
is
sure it's slightly more cleaning than your normal time cleaning was, and you can say it's a deep clean.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's insight one. You
But
don't
also
have to
don't
leave
lie
the
to
rooms
your
open.
guests.
Yeah.
Well, it's not lying if it's deeper cleaning than you normally would do.
It is deeper. Yeah, there was a Skift article that came out the other day. It talked about all the brands and all of their clean certifications, whatever that they're doing, the Lysol partnership and so forth. And I keep on thinking to myself, what does that really mean? So you partnered with Lysol. How do I know that your person went and sprayed Lysol?
Well, read the side of Lysol, and it will tell you that the 1% that it doesn't cover is coronavirus. So just FYI.
But even if it did, how do I know you put that in the room?
But it's reassurance, right? It's classic marketing where you align yourself with a brand to tell a message or create a narrative that you want people to see.
But if you wanted to save a ton of money and not have to deep clean, but get almost the same effect, just clean your TV remote and put it in a sanitization bag. It is the next biggest improvement you can do on this data.
It's 54% said greatly would increase confidence.
Which how weird is coronavirus that when you walk into a grocery store and you touch something and it's wet, that's actually comforting to you, where previously you touched a cart and it was wet, you'd be like, oh, what is that? But now it's like, oh, it's sanitized.
Well, again, it goes back to maybe I'm by no means changed the question, but just from a survey of 7, it's like, would you be happier if I said I have a air filtration system that will sanitize with the 99.9999% the air in a room within 10 minutes over the fact that I deep cleaned your room?
Which is as simple as installing UV lights in your coils, which, by the way, if you're in a humid climate, you should just do that anyways. It will actually increase the life of your air conditioning units and has the positive effect of killing airborne bacteria and viruses. I mean,
right now you can't get UV lights or ballasts right now. It's a months backlog market right now.
Yeah.
Your UV light doesn't get behind the bed, in the drawer, on the shelf. Under the table, they say that.
What are your guests doing that they're infecting behind the bed? And
we said we want a deep clean, man.
Do you really have to ask that question, Ed?
I really am concerned that you need to clean the back of a headboard that's up against a wall.
Have you looked back there?
I was gonna say, have you worked for a hotel before?
Actually, to be fair, no.
I think it goes to the point you're making, Melissa, is that the air sanitation is probably, in a safety improvement scenario, much more beneficial to a guest than the surface contact, like we talk about biofilm cleaning, that deep cleaning and vigorously the statement as you made purposely to do, represents. But that requires an education process to the guests that they're still not going to feel as comfortable as taking videos of us wiping down the old elevator switches.
Well, that's the operative word, right? None of these protocols really have a meaningful impact on safety of the guests.
Just psychology.
Right? It's purely perception. It's
Yep.
pure. So I think that's what we're really trying to get to. You know, we're a marketing agency. We want to find out what are the buttons we can push or the levers we can pull to move people from, like Tammy earlier, where she's like uncertain about traveling but wants to. How do we get Tammy's over to the light side from the dark side?
And how do you get levers with buttons? I mean, because that feels like that was just like
square buttons and round levers. I mean,
right.
It's really hard. So yeah.
This brings me back to something I said earlier about the people who traveled and their perception of their safety measures. And so we asked, how did the property meet your expectations in terms of cleanliness and sanitization? Over 60% said that they were met. More than that said that they exceeded expectations. Cleanliness and sanitization of the rooms, also 60% expectations were met. Across the board, all these categories, mostly expectations were met or exceeded. But I will say this, and this came up, I think, Dean, you said it before, that, the whole mask thing doesn't, counteract the social distancing aspect. And the one thing that did not meet, the highest thing that did not meet expectations was the social distancing enforcement on property.
Yep. And listen, I'm nowhere near Lauren Gray in how much I'm freaked out by this thing. However, I will say I had the experience of going to IKEA. Everyone was wearing masks. Absolutely everyone was. Everyone was wearing them correctly. It was just, there were too many people in there. I felt uncomfortable, and I'm not Lauren Gray. Like, it made me want to leave.
And I think, I, as the crazy person on the show who's done a fair amount of travel in the last few months, and my multiple
crazy amount of travel. It's not a fair amount of travel. You crazy, stupid travel all over the world. No, go ahead.
It has been all over the United States, but it was partial. I didn't do any of this for leisure. Half of it was work, and half of it was taking care of my in-laws, and the other, well, that doesn't make sense. A third and third.
Half and half and half.
Yeah.
Man,
because we had to move across the country. But to your point, Ed, I think for me, it's just as easy to social distance, if not easier, in a hotel as it is in a grocery store or Home Depot for me. At an airport, I've been able to easily you go through security, but it's still, they're so empty, like Boston Logan. It's so empty that I had no problem social distancing, and it was easier to do that than it was for me at Home Depot or the grocery store.
Yeah. But it's that fear of the unknown that everyone's struggling with. Or the fear of, listen, I hate getting on a plane and having someone sit next to me in the middle seat.
Right.
In normal time. I would lose my mind right now if that happened.
So I've been on 8 flights from between since COVID started, 8 flights. And I've only had to sit beside somebody one time, and I've been flying the airlines that have not, I've flown both American and United, who have said that they will sell the middle seat, but as to date, I've only had to sit beside one person. That was on a regional, on a jumper flight.
Yep.
So I'm only sharing my experiences. I'm not saying that everyone has the same, but.
So in your experiences, call out the heroes and the zeros. Let's go. Rapid fire. 3 heroes.
I want to say that I'm just going to share some observations. Let's say, like United, I've flown them 3 times, but they haven't been consistent in their boarding and offboarding. So, like, I've been on a flight where they said, okay, they actually would call rows and say, okay, rows 1 through 5, you can board, you can exit, but nobody is supposed to stand up until your row is called. So they did that on 2 of the flights, but not on the which made me feel better because that's when the people, some people like to just get up and crowd. And then on the 3rd flight, they didn't do that. It was still like a free for all, and I was like, I like that, and I started to like it, and then I was like, maybe it's a United thing, and then it turned out by the 3rd flight it wasn't. So I'm like, why didn't you always do this? So I've stayed and I guess regionally I've stayed at hotels in California, Washington, South Carolina, Florida. Florida though, I stayed in May, so we know Florida was a different place in May, and the people working at the hotel were not even wearing masks at the front desk. And I think that's changed now, but at the time I was coming from the West Coast, so I'm like, why can't you just freaking put a mask on, and the only thing they had done is set up a 6-foot table in front of the front desk to make me lean over to pick up to put my credit card in or whatever. When I flew though out of North Carolina, when I flew out of Raleigh, their the airport had not mandated masks, so the majority of people there were not wearing masks. By the time I got to Seattle, that was state mandate and everybody was wearing a mask. So I think it's just been an evolution over time as I've kind of watched some of the southern states catch up and get back on track. But I also don't believe in like the contact. I don't believe I can catch COVID from contact from somebody, over surfaces. And that's just my personal belief. So maybe I'm just less fearful of. And then I moved to Grand Junction and, my son, is exposed at camp. And that's been my first exposure throughout all this was when I moved to this super small town where there's no inventory and to buy a house or to live. And so you can't win, I don't think.
No, it's I wouldn't say it's random, but it's definitely out of influences and the spread of the chaos that you can't really say just because you're in a small town and nothing else is there that can't eventually come around and be something. Yeah. So Melissa, are we missing some highlights that you want to make sure we hit?
I think the important things we covered. Like I said, all the other questions, as I said, just in terms of trends, have shifted more positive, but just not back to where we were yet.
Yeah. Well, except for how likely you are to book a trip. Next 30 days, next 60 days, that's gotten worse, hasn't it?
It's not as bad as it was last time.
Okay.
But could that be a seasonality change as well too?
That's been one of my feelings on this whole time is some of this is seasonality. Yeah. Like for a while, like everyone was saying they would absolutely not book a trip to a ski destination. Well, it's because all the questions were being asked when there was no skiing. Mm-hmm. And they've obviously corrected that in their questions here. But yeah, it's still, problematic to see how few people are maybe or, more positive is, no longer 50% for the next 30 days. And there were a couple of points where we had hit that, haven't we? Maybe I missed the last one, so
yeah, the last one was a lot.
The last one was really bad.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I know that the Florida Restaurant Association was referring to a statistic I thrown in the local news that of those polled, and I want to find out where they pulled this from because they didn't say it was theirs. 72% are waiting for a vaccine or a solution before they make travel plans. I want to see where they pulled that from because they didn't say it was their survey. So please understand, grain of salt, don't know where this is coming from, but they referred to it in their newscast in reference to their concerns as to their industry. They referred to that number.
I think that's going to be a moving goalpost too, so I wouldn't hang your hopes on that because it's not just going to be that there's a vaccine. Then the media is going to focus on the fact of how few people have gotten the vaccine.
And its efficacy and its
right.
Side effects and that. We're going to have
the fact that people might try to double up. What did they say? There's 219. What's the guy? 219 active vaccine researches being done right now, and 30-something of them is in phase 3. how's that concoction of cocktails going to happen if somebody wants to start jumping on ship on all that?
That'll be Darwinism, though. I'm sorry. Some of this Darwinism is at play. Like, I'm sorry.
I mean, it's a real problem, right? Because there's going to be this information war and propaganda and lobbying and marketing saying this, you should get this one, not this one, which is going to create this immense amount of confusion and uncertainty, which is going to limit people's willingness to jump in and take the vaccine.
So we just have to go to Russia and take the vaccine they already came up with. We're fine. It's okay.
I am again going to say there is a little bit of benefit in time of a pandemic to not having a free society. China's dealt with this really well by just, basically telling people if you leave, you're going to be arrested and, enslaved or executed. They don't have the problems of, like someone getting into a fight at a grocery store because they asked someone to put a mask on, right? Like, it's not happening in those areas.
I would argue they have some other problems, though.
I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying this is one of those. I don't think prior to pandemic you could ever convince me that there were any positives to a non-free society. And I'm just my brain is spinning by the fact that we've actually found some.
Okay, to take in all fair grain, New Zealand is a free society, and they were as much about the lockdown, minus the threats. I don't think they threatened anybody with disappearing. I'm sure, though, there was a lot of political cleansing went on in China at the same time, mysteriously. In New Zealand, one of their great successes as to why they are COVID-free right now is they mandated a lot of things. And there was no just rove outsides and all this other stuff. They were very much about it, but they have a very small population. And so they had the ability.
They're a lot more spread out. I mean, there's some density of population too.
Oh yeah, you could get a couple of cities and so forth, but also they had a singularity of leadership that was mandating this.
Well, they only have they have under 5 million people living there. You can.
Well, they don't have two political sides that are deliberately trying to make the other.
There was singular leadership. There was singular leadership to their decision. Yeah. Same thing in South Korea. Same way that they handled what they did.
And they don't have a population that puts freedom above everything else.
Right?
Including their own life. Well, I guess it's New Hampshire got it right. Live free or die.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, to that end, I guess really, as we're talking about the fact of going into the fall and so forth, and the precipice of how many influencers will be on fall. You have the aspect of saying we're going to go into a very terrible social health situation from CDC's perspective. You have the uncertainty as to the school situation, as to how this spreads and how it may grow because of the insistence of going back to school. And there's a lot of people that do need to put their kids back into an environment that is educational for them at the lowest risk possible. It's hard to just blanket say you shouldn't send kids back, but by the same token, you shouldn't also blanket say you should send all the kids back, because you can't do that. There's certain kids that if you can put the
I will say, at least from what I've seen of the school systems, they've created choice.
Mm-hmm.
Which you do need to do, because there are kids whose lives have been very negatively affected by not being able to be in school.
Yes.
And you have kids who've lost their lives due to not being able to be in school. So the answer can't be no school. The answer needs to be situational, because there are children who are starving, who the only meal they get in a day is the school program.
Mm-hmm.
And that can't, be spoken about enough. And then I feel horrible for the families who have an abusive, person in their household. I can't even imagine what these last 5 months have been like, where there is no outlet, there's no escape. The hell that those people must be going through. So there are situations that need to be thought of when, building policy.
Well, and also without Kat being here, because they're doing the AHOA conference right now, the abuse of human trafficking, fortunate repercussions of now we all get to wear masks and hide and, walk through cameras and not know who we are unless there's some other features that can make it identifiable for people. And also the means of keeping it under wraps of not being discovered and not being seen, and isolating and not going into rooms and confirming safety and so forth. Remember we went through, and this is not too many years back, Does a D&D really mean a D&D? Given the circumstances of what happened in Las Vegas, we had that whole discussion. How often do you have to go into a room to ensure safety and security and so forth? And that's been removed from the conversation. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of ramifications, plus the mental fatigue associated with this. I'm sure from looking just in general that there's a certain frustration of wanting to do, but not the safety of being done. And yet, where does that manifest itself?
Right.
And now it could be in possible mild depression or whatever. How do we encourage or be helpful in helping these people, as you said, that donut of distance that people are willing to travel? How can we make it feel comfortable enough for them that Stephanie's ability to isolate at a hotel but still feel comfortable enough to do something of enjoyment that's not at home where you've been stuck for 5 months? How do we translate that into our, I wouldn't say marketing, because that means we're always trying to say just the good stuff, but how do we, in our way of answering questions on our website that let people discover what they need to know to make the decisions that they want to make? That probably is the way to translate it, what I would consider to be marketing.
Lowering your rate.
Yeah, without it being a rate and date thing going on and stuff like that. I mean, even for us, we were talking about trying to get away for a few days and just go, as we say, wiggle our toes in the sand. So we're even talking to Airbnbs and VRBOs and so forth, and it requires contacting the host direct and asking very specific questions that do not get reflected on their website. They're still not up to identifying all the things because there's too many diversities. They can get totally anal about what they do, or they can go over and just give them as much information as they can, knowing that as they open the channel of communication, people like me, as Ed's quick to point out, I'm going to ask you whether or not you're using, certain chemicals for your cleaning process, for God's sakes. And do you use a hazmat suit when you check me? Because if you ain't, I'm not going to come.
Lauren, just take the boat to a remote island. Like, you have a boat.
Oh, yeah.
There are plenty of remote islands around you.
We went to Boca Grande and the sandbars up there.
Yeah.
You want to talk about no social distancing? Those guys are shoehorned like little. I mean, the sandbars were worse than anything else. They're all like in a big group, like over in Stewart's neighborhood where he doesn't wear a mask.
Yeah. We do now.
Well, because Stewart bought a house in a nicer neighborhood, so they're all masked.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, and talking about the mental health aspect of this, like, this entire everything about what's happened in the last 5 months is so taxing. Because first of all, like, even not talking about the really obvious stuff, but how many people go through their life with very little change? And yet in the last 5 months, the amount of change forced upon everyone is so overwhelming, and how much the change has changed. That's a lot of what society is struggling with right now, is they're used to kind of picking a truth, and that truth holds long enough that, it's not uncomfortable. But there's so much dynamic happening here that every day, every hour, there's change. And that's grating on certain types of people who, really have a hard time with change. And then God forbid something happens, like if you're put into what's already a tough situation in normal times, and then you have to deal with it during, what's happening right now. These are all things that need to be thought of as we're building, plans for what's allowed, what's not allowed. There has to be some room for thought on, not everyone is perfectly well adjusted and healthy. They need certain things that are maybe not obvious to someone who is.
Two perspectives to add to this that I find interesting through the dialogue of friends of mine that are here that are retired. I'm speaking for them, not of them. They have referred to the fact that they are losing time. They're being squandered. They're being stolen from. Because here they have retired. And they were going to be doing all these things. They have an RV, they have a boat, they have whatever it is that they've acquired through their hard work, and they've retired, and they can't do anything but stay at home. A lot of these people already stayed at home most of the time anyway. But now I have friends that are actually building pools in their backyard where they said they would never have one. Why? Because they can't go out and do anything. So they're going to start creating the environment around their home that they were going out and doing. So there's a lot of that as a potential in the future tense, that if you can create some level of safety, security for them to make the decision to say that you can go to them, which brings me to my question point. if you have the physical facilities to be able to isolate sections out, identify them, whether it be a group of cottages or a wing of a building that can be isolated. Do you think there's any value to say that we have this ultra sanitation sealed, all the things that Melissa, you pointed up with the stickers and the sanitation, this is the ultra super duper safe, nobody sees anybody, touches anybody thing. Does that sell, or is that just an over dramatification of what is
I
currently?
think it has the. If Tim was here, he'd say, when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. I think it creates a shipwreck in that the non super duper sanitized area is now the dirty area, right? And I think that's the perception that a lot of people would take.
Well, even beyond that, like, are you going to put access control so that the people from the dirty area can't mingle with the people from the clean area? I mean, is staff going to be allowed to be in the dirty area, or,
with heat cameras and temperature checkers and everything else? I mean, you're talking about the full ball of wax.
You're creating good and bad at that point, and that's never a good value proposition to sell to people, because you're going to likely have more bad than good in terms of what you're selling.
But then it kind of contradicts something.
Are only the uber wealthy allowed in the clean area? Like,
well, but then again, this goes back to something you pointed out from making websites, Stuart. We make it for the least common denominator. Mm-hmm. We're doing the same by not doing that. I know what you're saying about the shipwreck. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just on a contrapoint of it, saying for those who find this to be the ultimate, and I'll give you the example. I have a friend of mine that I'm helping him do his marketing with. He sells it to doctor's office. They do a one-room single sanitation sealed. And that room is for high risk or high concern risk people that they are brought into by a back door, by somebody that is completely checked every day for testing and brought into that room for that purpose of being completely isolated from everybody else, and nobody sees or does anything that isn't been completely checked as being, before walking in that door, safe to be seen.
Yeah. So
and
I actually, but I
people that have high risk, and there's a lot of them in the market already right now. And also for those who have high concern, they just don't want to be around the general populace.
But there's a difference between catering for extreme cases and
yes,
in creating a classed hierarchy, right? And because when we were talking earlier about don't cater to the lowest common denominator, be specific and personalized, it's additive. It's giving each individual what they want. It's not taking away from someone else. Right. And what you're creating is the haves and the have-nots. In that, especially in the society we live in.
I'll give the America people their keggers in their wing too. I'll let them walk around without masks or underwear or anything if they want to.
Yeah, but you can't have that because you're actually creating an expectation that's going to end up getting you sued if one of your employees happens to have COVID and gives it to one of these uber isolated people.
Yeah.
Again, it goes back to logistics. I mean, that's down
because you have to understand a lot of the logistics you're talking about catch most cases of COVID, but there have been multiple cases of COVID with no elevated, body temperature. Because you can't completely section this off, like you really couldn't. Hospitals can't even do it. So what makes you think a hotel can? You shouldn't set an expectation to welcome a traveler that needs that, because really, I mean, what you are catering to is a traveler who needs it. And my gosh, first of all, you're going to be charging them more, which also means they have more resources, because the legal ramification of not delivering on such a crazy promise is going to be substantial, because the argument will be you didn't have to do this as a business. You have.
Well, I'm not saying we're guaranteeing. I'm just saying that we have done all the following lists. If this finds to be safety for you and you feel comfortable that we're doing all these exceptionally additional things to the point that you're willing to make a choice for travel.
Are you going to charge more for it?
Yes, you would be.
All right, then.
Sooner or later, though, we have to accept that there's a certain level of risk in the things that we do. And we talk all about COVID. COVID is not the only thing killing people these days. People do still get hit by cars, whatever. There's sleeping disease is actually a thing. Did you know that? Mm-hmm. So, certainly COVID's very high.
There are people who die every year from overdosing on water.
There you go.
So, just saying.
I have a 2-story house. I wake up in the morning, I could fall down the steps. Okay. Now I'm not trying to minimize COVID by any means. Don't misunderstand that. But it's not the only thing that kills people. We take it
mayhem.
every day. So, what do we define as at a point where I'm ready to accept this risk of what I'm doing? And I just think that's something we have to come to terms with.
And you can use flu as an example, right? In the US, 50,000 people a year die from flu every year.
And it has a vaccine.
We have a vaccine that some people choose not to, a lot of people choose not to get. And
Like
it's,
Stuart.
the efficacy is kind of 50-50. No, I got the vaccine, I still got
Then
it.
why the hell did I get the flu from you?
if you'd like to prove that with science, then you can do so. But you're right, 100%, Dean, that people will get a tolerance level at some point. There's some threshold where the media, and I'm not blaming the media for over sensationalizing it, other than to say people react to what they're being told. And
Can we stop calling them the media? Can we just call them the entertainment reporters? I mean, because they're...
That's so true. I wish it wasn't, but it is.
Yeah.
It's media. But yeah, I think you're spot on, Dean. I think people will get to a point where they're comfortable with taking some risk, just like we risk, every day when we get out of bed, or even staying in bed. We could get hit by a plane that crashed into our house. So.
Well, and there are still things that kill more people than the COVID virus does.
Like heart disease.
Yeah, heart disease. Tuberculosis is still a thing. Nobody closed the school because of tuberculosis. But it still kills more people.
Okay. And I would like to make this distinction on some things. There's a lot that kills us, but not a lot of it can be transferred.
Yes. Right.
Okay. There's a difference between I have heart disease, I die, compared to I can give you heart disease and you die.
There's a lot of things that give you heart disease that no one talks about.
Very true as well. Diabetes.
What we can't control that we can contract is what's the fear.
Our sedentary lifestyle.
Right.
So we should start marketing around how our resort has all these great amenities so that you don't have a sedentary lifestyle, so you don't get heart disease.
Boom.
Nature, travel, and wellness resorts are a thing now. That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I think to Lauren's point, I know where you were going. I tend to agree, especially with Stuart and Ned, as far as I think it was a little overkill and ripe for lawsuits. But the idea, like if you have cottages, if you have something that's unique and different, or you're on the coast and you have these private rooms, talking about that and marketing that is one thing. But I think to go like a wing of our property is this ultra high luxury and all super clean and perfect really does open you up to potential lawsuits, to all the things that they said. But I do think if you have something, like I've looked at places here locally, and by locally I mean Northern California, that have cottages or unique room types or different things where you are kind of sequestered or away from other people as options. And I think from a marketing standpoint, that's fine, as long as you're not trying to create something extra or that has the perception of a guarantee of you're not.
Well, no guarantee to it, but there actually are some all-inclusive resorts in the Mediterranean that are now listing themselves as COVID-free, COVID-safe, COVID traveling destinations, where they go through pretty much what I just described. A complete overhaul of anybody that's in contact, constantly tested, constant cleaning, constant sanitation. Everybody that's around there is, kept in a bubble, and they're constantly tested. And you go to these places, and everything's included, and you don't go anywhere else. And they're in existence right now. Yeah. Now, I don't feel that works. I'm making this an extreme case, and thank you for pointing it out. But the idea of saying that there is a spectrum of safety, as we have all acknowledged. There are those that don't give a rat's butt, and then there's those that, like me, that want to know what the latest brand cleaning product you have. So, and then even beyond that, because there is those that really truly have genuine risk factor of contriving.
And unfortunately, those people shouldn't be traveling right now. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't
say that. You can't say that. You can't say, gee, I'm really sorry for your life. You can't travel. I refuse to accept that. There is everybody in the world has the right to travel. And if I can provide
I didn't say they can't. However, like, if I get on an airplane, I have a far lower risk of dying from COVID than someone with no immune system. So, I am cautious
you
about
on a plane that doesn't put anybody else on it to get you to someplace you've never seen, so you go on a beach you always wanted to be on. God dang it! I hope I'm that guy.
And I hope you have that much money. Because let's be honest, the people who are really feeling this pain are not the ones who can do the things you're talking about. They're fine.
That's the thing. That's the thing. So if you have the method of providing,
but you want to charge more for it, which then instantly undoes what you're talking about.
No.
Oh, you don't want to charge more for it.
It's not the purpose of charging more for it. It's the purpose of.
Well, you have to charge more for it because it's expensive to do, which then instantly makes it to where it's not available to the person you're envisioning should get the benefit of it.
Remember when I just say this, travelers, that if you could put a refrigerator in the room, it wasn't about the rate of the room, it was the fact that you were attentive to the fact that they needed it. I'm talking about the same mentality. If I can bring
bubbling your staff,
that gives them this,
bubbling your staff to create the environment you're talking about, in itself, the expense of that is astronomical. Go ask the NBA, go ask Disney how much it costs to create a bubble. They can tell you it's not cheap. So,
but the fact that we can possibly do this, and I mean this from a Make-A-Wish Foundation supporter, if you can create the solution to the problem, why can't you?
Well, but you're talking out of both sides of your mouth now.
Yeah,
and I was literally about to stop this debate because oftentimes when we pick on you, Lauren, Ed and I will get people telling us we were mean to you on the show, and this is never mean spirited. It's we respect each other greatly, and we like to have these little spars because it's entertaining for all of us. But you can't say I'm going to create this elite system that people are going to pay more money for, and then say, but I'm doing it in this altruistic way to help people that have the need for it, and it's charitable, right? It can't be high-end luxury and charitable at the same time.
I'm not talking about high-end luxury. You're adding words that I never added. I didn't say elite, and I didn't say luxury. I said if it has the possibility of creating a solution, then it's more expensive to be done for those who can afford it.
It's an expensive solution,
but for those
only
people
available to those who can afford it.
But for those who can't afford it, why shouldn't it be possible?
Yeah, if it can be done, why can't we do it? Is your message?
Right.
I think
I'm not talking about the value proposition of how much money you can make or whether or not. But if I can,
were you saying that sarcastically, or were you?
Why wouldn't I? No, sincerely. I see his point. There's a lot of logistics that go and barriers that go into that, but it's a legitimate point. If you can do it, then why aren't you doing it? Now, okay, so the answer maybe is it costs too much money. Okay, how do we solve that problem? Right. So solve the problems, but first we have to have what's the goal? What are we trying to do?
So solve the economic issue of bubbling your staff and extra sanitization and all this extra investment, and solve it in a way that it does not at all touch profitability. And Lauren's vision is correct.
Didn't even add that. For a person that builds
so you're saying a business should do this not profitably? Because
no, Ed. What I'm saying is, for a person that builds companies to solve problems, you're absolutely poo-pooing on the very concept of why
solve problems.
Stop presenting this. You've shifted your argument.
Yeah,
you do what I do when I'm losing an argument. I change what I was saying at the beginning.
What's the purpose of coming up with creativity if you don't have the means of its value?
Came up with this as a ploy to help a business make more money during a pandemic. You position this as, hey, what about this idea?
Should a business do it at a loss? Let me ask that. Let's start with this. Should a business do that at a loss?
NBA is.
Are you kidding me? If the NBA wasn't on TV right now, the loss would be substantially more.
Have you seen
ESPN and Disney also have invested in this because they were about to lose billions and billions of dollars by not having the NBA on.
Right.
So it was for profit.
But right now it's not profitable.
Afforded to people who can afford private jets and all that stuff. It's only being done for like the wealthiest of wealthy.
They are at a loss right now, and they're continuing to be at a loss right now.
Then they would be had they not done it.
Oh, so you're saying it's okay to be at a loss as long as it's attempting to be profitable.
The size of Disney, which let's face it, this is all about Disney because it's ESPN and Disney. The size of Disney, yes.
It's time to switch to the Jack Daniels.
Over the next 6 months because they have endless supplies of money. They lost $3.3 billion in one quarter from their theme parks.
Okay, to bring it back to reality of what we're talking about, I have lost.
Can we have a hug first?
Hold on. I've lost money to create a guest experience because it was the right thing to do for the guest at the time. Could I do that to every guest that walked to my hotel? Absolutely not. But for that one guest, I was willing to eat costs to make sure that I lived up to what I said I was going to do for them. Now, in that process, if I can provide a service because of the logistics that it takes to do that, then yes, I want to always do it for profit because I'm running a business. But two, there are times, opportunities to Stuart, your point to the exception you think I'm making, I'm talking two sides out of my mouth, that could be given to, or at least helpful in giving somebody an opportunity that can't afford it out of the profitability spectrum, allow them to experience.
Like sell a lot of it to wealthy people and mark it up even more because for every night they stay, they give a half night to a.
I don't know. Ask all those people that make socks and give another pair away. I don't care. I mean, if you're talking about the fact if you have the ability to go over and do it as a hospitality person, why wouldn't you try to figure a way?
Sure. The spirit of what you're suggesting now, I agree with 100%, but that's not what you started this conversation about.
Yeah, your current new argument, sure.
Yes.
No, I talked about the pendulum swing, but if you could isolate a wing and so forth, just to see what the idea was. But to what Tammy was pointing out, there must be some middle ground to being able to isolate out what you're capable of doing and presenting it in a format that people appreciate, that might be what they needed to see and understand to make a choice.
Lauren, I love you. You're awesome.
I want to take it back to what you were talking about with the closed environment with the all-inclusive resorts, because there's another industry, another segment of our industry that I think the only way that they come back is to replicate that, and that's the cruise industry. The only way the cruises have a chance of coming back, and mind you, you see the reports, Royal Caribbean says 2021 bookings are just going like crazy. But the only way this works is if A, the ship is hospital grade clean, everything has got to be sanitized, and B, everyone that comes on has got to be tested. And I don't mean just a test that you get results from 3 days later. I mean, like, we have to have a way to test them there now, prove you are or are not carrying this disease. So that doesn't work. You've now got a closed environment. You don't do any ports of call because that's a risk, but you've got a closed environment on a floating hotel that can go out to sea and you can have a good time.
But see, again, the problem is
you have to quarantine everyone for 14 days before they put a foot on there.
Right, and the other problem is no ports of call plus social distancing. Well, on a boat, but wait, on a boat, social, like real social distancing.
The idea is once you got on the boat, you're in a safe zone.
But you're not. But that's the thing. This isn't a disease that like we have anywhere near the ability to hit 100%.
You're right.
So,
right.
And we won't in January either, and we likely won't in March of next year. So here's the problem. Yes. Royal Caribbean and all of them have record bookings for next year. And in January, if one cruise ship in the entire world gets a massive outbreak, it's all gone.
You're exactly right. Yeah.
Right. So, and then what you were explaining, if you did set up that Shangri-La, it's really close to a floating prison.
Well, there's a fine line.
It's a very fine line.
To think that they want to enjoy it. Do they want to be floating around in an open ocean, catching sunsets and sunrises, or sitting at home worrying
catching
about
sunsets and sunrises?
I think you're looking at the fact that we're going to all take our own advice and realize that we have to change what we're doing and how we're doing it. Stuart, to your point, maybe there is a 14-day isolated quarantine hotel by the Caribbean cruise line that sits outside there. And they have to sit in there for 14 freaking days until they can get on the boat. I don't know. I'm just making this up. And they might go to
got better technology by then.
Might be in a bubble, and that they can only go to certain places and be in a bubble. We don't know.
I think you just give everyone hazmat suits and let them just go on with their life. Everyone has to wear a full hazmat for 2021. We're just going into Mad Max, right? Next year it's Mad Max year. It's the year the film took place. Obviously, this is what led to Mad Max. So let's just lean into it.
And again, you may be brighter than you know, but by the same token,
it scares me.
I think as long as we have the hope that we can figure some of this stuff out, that we won't be following into that. We will figure out different ways of doing it. We will be water over a rock. Anyway, sorry to drag everybody into a fun dialogue of.
I love it when you guys spot.
I like when you lie too. Like, sorry everyone that I did this. No, you're not.
To clarify, Lauren will call both me and Ed after this show and say, "Hey, that was a fun one. We really got into that one."
I enjoyed
Watch
it.
thinking, "These guys
I actually
hate
have a scheduled phone call with Lauren
I do
after
actually
this
have a call
show
with you.
where
Yeah.
likely the conversation's going to be, wow, how fun was that conversation?
We all agree that the fun of this is when we get to disagree. Because honestly, if we just keep nodding heads to each other, it's like,
It's all
okay,
the
great,
fun
we
of
all
it.
agree. That's wonderful. The idea of it is that we have different perspectives on some of this stuff. Melissa, you were the catalyst of this today because you brought all the different stuff. And
She's
I
like,
can't
don't
thank
put
you
that.
enough.
She's like, don't put that on me. Don't put your dysfunction on me.
I brought up a hypothetical that went way off the center. So anyway.
Melissa
I'll
is
keep that one.
counting down the days that they're no longer doing this report, so she no longer has to come on this show.
Oh no. Never will be.
I have to
Never will
run. I have
happen.
an important call coming in. Have a great
Ed,
weekend, everyone.
let's get to real quick. Say
Thanks.
bye. And where? Oh, all right. Flip 2. That's where it came from. All right.
I'm out of here with you guys.
Stephanie,
So,
Cogwheel Marketing. How did they get a hold of you?
Cogwheelmarketing.com or check me out on LinkedIn, Stephanie Sparks Smith. And we're going to be rolling out some social media stuff, videos related to eCornell. eCornell is rolling out their hotel digital marketing course. You guys, might be something to check out if someone needs some new training. I think, Tammy, somebody from Milestone has some videos on there too. I think Anil did
Yeah.
some too. Yeah.
Yeah, Neil typically does a lot of stuff for Cornell. So
Yeah.
Nice.
So thanks I missed you guys. Hope to be back on more regularly now that I have a place to live.
Yay.
And looking forward to it.
Hopefully you get some furniture in and the kids don't drive you crazy.
I hope not to. All right.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks, guys.
Stephanie.
So Tammy, where is it people can find you in Milestone?
Absolutely. Milestoneinternet.com, or I'm on LinkedIn as Tammy Carlisle. And Stephanie said, eCornell. There's also HSMAI has been doing a ton of education and stuff on digital marketing, revenue management, and the like. So lots of opportunities. And I know we've got a lot of webinars and content on our blog as well. So.
Yeah, you have some good stuff coming up. I saw that. I signed up for some stuff. Really always good stuff from you guys. Thank you for that. Dean, know more about your complex and totally comprehensive meta search world domination.
Basecamp Meta, designed for training agencies and hoteliers about Meta, and metasearchmarketing.com to provide you a platform agnostic consultation about running your meta search. Before Stephanie left, I was going to actually say on one of our live shows down the road here, I want to spar with her a little bit over meta search. Her and I have some varied opinions on whether or not it can attract new guests. So that'll be a conversation for another day.
So it won't be the Stuart, Lauren, Ed dialogue. It'll be the Dean, Stephanie.
Let's go.
Okay. All right, go.
You'll be the headliners that week.
Yeah. Melissa, if people want to know about you and, of course, Fuel Travel and the continuation of the survey and everything else like that and all the other cool stuff that Stuart takes credit for, where can they find you? And your podcast, the award-winning podcast.
All things related to fuel at fueltravel.com, either /podcast/blog. That's where all the survey results are. You can find me on LinkedIn at Melissa Kavanaugh, or I'm on Twitter, M.A. Kavanaugh.
Mr. Stuart Butler, sir.
Yeah, what she said. But I will say that for those of you interested in this data, Melissa and the team have been working really hard on this, and we have been doing a deep dive into every question on the podcast as they come out. So we'll be recording, for those who want to dig deeper into this, volume 8, we'll be recording that this afternoon, pushing it out probably on Monday. So if you subscribe to the fueltravel.com/podcast, also you can search for Fuel Hotel Marketing Podcast. Anywhere you listen, you'll find it, but we'll be digging deep into that data. And then anyone listening to that's interested in improving their check-in process, reducing contact between guests and staff, then we have a really cool mobile app that is selling like hotcakes right now because everyone's looking to keep everyone safe and reassure guests and get people back in the hotel. So fueltravel.com is the place to look at that as well.
Also, too, you're booking, aren't you one of the only GDPR compliant platforms at this point?
So we have a booking engine that's very mobile friendly, very data secure, so GDPR and California Privacy Act, and it's also as close to ADA compliant as you can get. So basically WCAG 2.1, AA standards, it meets those. I think we are the only booking engine that can claim WCAG compliance. So,
Uh,
yeah.
Powerful stuff.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you for everyone's patience on our dialogue at the tail end, but I certainly appreciate the inspiration for it. For this and all previous 261 episodes of the show, which is this show is actually our anniversary, 6th-year anniversary total. So we're rolling into our 7th. So it's picking me anymore.
You always add a year to it. When did
No,
you?
actually, I started in 14, but it wasn't consistent. 15 was consistent.
Okay.
And so, now we're keeping with the consistency aspect of it with the numerics and so forth. We roll into the 7th year after today, technically. So we're finally at that point. I get to go and be right after a year. I feel like Trump. Eventually I'll be right. Also, too, we do a recap podcast, which goes over through some tools and techniques that we don't talk about here on the show as much as we used to, and also a recap of the show, which I'll admit the tail end conversation is being me completely right and Stuart and Ed completely wrong. And but please join us again next week. Show number 263, 11:30 Eastern time. And for everyone that did watch us and listen to us and follow us and comments in the chat box, sincerely appreciate your participation and dialogue. And always an open invitation for those that do join us. If you'd like to join us on the screen, you're always more than welcome to, as long as there's an open chair for it. As you can see, we don't mind disagreeing and or agreeing and or listening. So Thank you all very much for your time today. Bye, everyone, and thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys. See ya.